We humans always have to convert raw materials to something that we can eat, that we can digest. Cooking is one of the simplest technologies here. When we use organisms, mainly microorganisms, to do these conversions, then we have food biotechnology. My name is Volkmar Passold and I'm professor in food biotechnology. Our research is mainly focused on yeast. This yeast is forming carotenoids, therefore it has this red color. These carotenoids we can also use as antioxidants and as food ingredients. But even more interesting is that this yeast can convert sugars that we get from forest and agricultural residues and produce oil. And this oil has the same quality as vegetable oils, for instance palm oil. The aim is at the end to reduce the use of fossil resources to produce our food and also to reduce greenhouse gases by this. One might ask, why are we doing research on yeast? Yeast we can buy in the shop and this is nothing special. Well, we have to say yeast is something that is very, very diverse. The yeast that we can buy in the shop is one species. For now, we know more than 2,000 yeast species. And we also know that the diversity just among yeast is bigger than among all vertebrates. Yeasts can make a lot of interesting products which we can use for food or even as novel materials. So this is a real interesting research area. And since yeasts are closely related to us, we can even learn something about us, about our health, about our metabolism.
Welcome, Volkmar Passold.
Thank you.
So yeast can convert, for example, straw, sawdust or wood chips to eatable oil.
Yeah.
For how long has this technique been known?
Well, a bit more than 100 years, I would say. So it was used in actually in both world wars to replace imported vegetable oils. And there it has been used, being grown on residues of paper mills actually. So has been used in Germany at this time. So also, yeah, far more than 100 years.
Okay. How environmentally friendly is the process where oil is refined from straw or wood residues?
That is, yeah, it's a bit difficult to say. So that depends also on the methods, on what we do with the residues, with all the materials around. Our colleagues from the Department of Energy and Technique have made a study together with us where we estimated the release of greenhouse gases when we replace vegetable oils or fossil oils in that terms by yeast oils, and in this case then we can save something like 33 up to 80% of greenhouse gases, so dependent on technologies we are using.
Okay. You mentioned in the film that we know more than 2,000 yeast species. So which one is your favorite?
And you want a short answer, yes?
Yeah, well, yes.
As a consumer, I must clearly say Saccharomyces pasteurianus. That is beer that we use for making lager, the yeast that we use for lager beer.
Okay.
So Saccharomyces cerevisiae also interesting for baking and brewing other beers. As a scientist, well, we have a few years ago described 2 new yeast species. One of them, Nicacia cerealis is it called now, that is actually related to one species that has been recently isolated on a space station and is the only, is a new species, has up to now not found on Earth.
Okay.
So it's, but I mean, on the other hand, is it of course the yeast that we are currently working on. This is so fascinating. In principle, it consists of different species, one could say, 80% of the genome, but they're still forming sexual hybrids. I think this is such an amazing diversity. I think this is just cool to work with. So I mean, and of course, well, scientists always like the one that they are working at the moment.
So you're describing a world of yeasts.
Yes.
Yeah. So, well, we're very excited to listen to your presentation. So please enter the stage.
Thank you.
Then I would like to introduce Volkmar Passot, professor in food biotechnology. And he's going to talk about how food biotechnology is the origin and future of human civilization. Please.
Thank you, Marlene, and welcome to my presentation. So now I have to look where I'm standing here. So we are talking about food biotechnology and the origin and future of human civilization. I have 15 minutes to convince you that yeast is the fundament of our society. And I'm starting with food technology. We have a huge brain, and sometimes we're also using it. This huge brain needs a lot of energy. This energy must come from somewhere. But paradox enough, is it so that our digestion apparatus is not very efficient? And actually, when we look back in evolution, is it so that its capacity decreased? So when we would use only raw material and want to get the energy that we need, then we have to eat 8 hours a day without any break. So it's clear that we need some technology to be the humans that we are. And cooking is a very simple technology, and on this graph you see also that cooking makes nutrients in our food better available. And food biotechnology is a similar thing as cooking, but here we're not using high temperatures, we're using the metabolic abilities of microorganisms to degrade our food raw materials and to make something eatable out of it. So what the microbes are doing, they are degrading macromolecules, and by this increase the availability of nutrients. They also decrease the concentration of compounds that, for instance, plants are producing to prevent to be eaten. Plants cannot run away, so they produce anti-nutrients. They also, by food biotechnology, we can also prevent the growth of pathogenic, of undesirable microorganisms. And this procedure makes that we have here as a very efficient way of preserve food. It's one of the oldest methods of food preservation. And of course, last but not least, by microbial fermentation, we also improve the aroma and the taste of our food. So now we need time for some history, but I would start at first with one recent observation, and that is about fruit-eating mammals and birds. Those animals prefer actually fruits that are infected. With other words, they prefer fruits that are in a way pre-fermented. Fruits, we find fruits in nature. They came up in evolution about 100 million years ago. And this is a very important time point in evolution. During this time, that was the first time that sugars were freely available in nature. So otherwise, free sugars, monodisaccharides, are immediately eaten by microbes, so they are not really free there. Fruits were the first time. So this development went on. About 80 million years ago, the sugar content increased. At the same time, an accident happened with the ancestor of our baking and brewing yeast. So at this time, the genome duplicated And this double number of genes in the genome in a cell made that a group of genes was released from selection pressure. And due to that, their regulation could mutate, could change. And what happened here is that this yeast at the end more or less repressed respiration and instead formed alcohol. So about 80 million years ago, we had then the first time in evolution where we had substantial amounts of free ethanol in nature. So while also nowadays we see that bigger animals have a certain affinity to alcohol. So why do I put this point of the extinction of dinosaurs on it 65 million years ago? Well, they were at this time the ruling bigger animals. And what we see also from this picture on the left, the only survivors of this dinosaurs, the birds, still have an affinity to fermented foods. So I would not take up all the theories about extinction of dinosaurs. There is something established, but maybe we can also think in different directions. About 10 million years ago, humans, or not humans, but the ancestors of humans and all big apes underwent a mutation that made them more alcohol tolerance, mutation in alcohol dehydrogenase. So, and with this, we can jump to our real, from the paleontologic history to the prehistory. About 13,000 years ago, people started growing grain. And there are also evidences that they used this grain not for baking bread, but for making beer out of it. So the interesting thing is, those people at this time were not settled. They were still nomadic, they were going around. So in a way, we can say that people started first to make agriculture, to make fermented food, actually to have some parties, and then they settled. So question is, who domesticated whom? Was it the humans about the grain and the yeast, or was it the yeast that domesticated humans at the end? Anyway, so then a few years further, so I should mention it, the first evidence for fermented food was found here in Sweden, in Blekinge, and it was fermented fish. One could think whether it was surströmming or something similar, but well, I mean, it was at least so. And then 8,000 years ago, kind of industrial ethanol production in China, and then 5,000 to 3,000 years ago, wine, bread, beer fermentation in Sumeria and Egypt. So at the same time, also the bigger municipal communities were formed, cities there. And we all know that cities are the basis of centers of science and art and technology. But when you have so many people around on one place and no idea about hygiene, no idea about microbiology, so then you get a huge problem. You get a problem in getting conserved food and feeding them, and also in safe beverages. So and now I make the link to the headline of this picture. Actually, the Bible is void of states of drinking water, but the other way around of having alcoholic beverages, there are many documents about it. So, and that was just because it was dangerous to drink water. So people used all the time microorganisms for make fermented food, but they had no idea that they were using microorganisms. Microbes were discovered in the 17th century, and the fact that yeast is making alcoholic fermentation was discovered 1837 by a group or by several scientists independently. Pasteur himself discovered lactic acid fermentation and investigated physiology of lactic acid and alcoholic fermentation. And the later one, I would say, he did it because he hated Germans, but this is another story. So at this time then, when people were aware of the role of microbiology, of the microorganisms, then microbiology established as a science. So two essential events in the development of humanity, the formation of big cities, of municipalities, and microbiology as a science are directly connected to the production of fermented food. So, and now we jump to the present times. And present times, well, food production is of course essential. We need to eat also nowadays. But we also see that food production is a certain threat for society. And what I mean with this, you see on this picture, we are cutting more and more areas of rainforest, and a big part of this to produce, for instance, plants like soya or palms, oil palms, to cover our demands here. So for what are we using these plants? Well, I provide one example of aquaculture here. So aquaculture as such is a nice thing. So we all know the problems with catched fish. So we can produce it kind of around our coasts. And it increased also during the last years. The problem is we need to feed the fish. And what we still are doing is we use material that we get from catched fish. Fish meal as a protein source, fish oil as an oil source. So fish meal can be replaced by vegetable oils partially, but vegetable oils are, for instance, from soya, which are at the end then which is not sustainable. Fish oil is a source of long-chain unsaturated fatty acids. We can replace a part of it, the part that is responsible for energy production by vegetable oils. Again, we use soya oil here, which is a problem. So when we look in general on the utilization of vegetable oils, so we see that we use most of it as feed. So then food and then a little bit of biodiesel. So here we have a problem. Animal production is actually one of the main drivers of environmental problems. I will briefly mention then also food production is one of the biggest producers of greenhouse gases and consumers of fossil resources, about 20% of the total mix, and also a producer of plastic waste. So our research is in a way settled around this. So we are trying to convert something that we cannot eat, for instance, straw or wood residues, to something edible. So after some pre-treatment, we use our oleaginous yeasts to grow there, and those yeasts, as I mentioned, they're producing oil, they're producing carotenoids and some other interesting compounds. I would just show, these yeasts are the fattest organisms on Earth. So on the picture on the right side, you see over time a development. It starts with a little lipid droplet, and at the end the cell is almost full of it. In the meantime, we have also strains who are faster in that. We have tested feeding fish, and the fish as well, with these lipids. So, but you can also use those lipids for food and other purposes. Carotenoids are very interesting. We find beta-carotene, which we also find in carrots, but even more interesting, maybe taurolane and taurolauridine, which are strong antioxidants, and some other compounds, which also are good emulgators, so which we can use in different applications here. One interesting finding in our research with one yeast strain, so usually when we feed it wheat straw hydrolysate, so we have several sugars, and this strain was, as long as it was eating up glucose, it was building up lipids, it was getting fat, but when it took the other sugar, xylose, after 96 hours, then it also in parallel started degrading its internal lipids. So it was mobilizing the fat, xylose, as a fat burner. Interestingly, a similar effect has been found in mammals, in mice in that term, so that acted actually the same. So here you might find some parallels to the mammalian metabolism, so to understand how these organisms can act with lipids. So I have So to summarize this one, so we can actually provide solutions to the current environmental problem. So we can prevent feed and food losses by biopreservation. We can work on reduction of consumption of meat. So for instance, also plants have a lower nutritional value, but when we use microorganisms, we can ferment the plants and improve the availability. But I would also advocate for anyway still having animal production. Sustainable animal production is good for the environment, for the diversity in these open landscapes. So also we cannot completely skip it. I have a bit briefly talked about the utilization of novel biomass sources into the food chain or into other value chains. So here I would briefly show on this graph here, so that indeed using, for instance, biofuels can be a key to come to a fossil-free society, but we have also to do many other actions. So the blue and reddish parts of the columns here are measures that save energy, that reduce our energy consumption. So, and finally, we can use yeast as a model organism to understand our own physiology, to do something for our health. So, by this, I'm almost finished. I think when I would mention all people who made that I'm standing here, I would clearly go over the time. So I will leave this picture here. I would just mention and say thank you to my family, who is surviving my tendency to tell long stories on the coffee board, and while also surviving the fact that I'm often working more than working hours. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Volkmar Passolt, and welcome back. What an interesting presentation you gave us.
Thank you.
Well, what is required for a commercial breakthrough for microbial oils?
Yeah, I think everything is on the costs in that term. I think fermentation technology we have developed and all these things around, but what we really need are efficient extraction technologies. Here is it so that yeast is very robust, has a very strong cell wall. So also here is it a bit tricky to crack this one. So one way is also then to co-utilize, to find other valuable compounds. For instance, these carotenoids, and identify, for instance, these values, this taurine and so on. They are very interesting antioxidants and other compounds in the yeast cell. So also utilizing it, getting down the price by this, that is probably the major hurdle to get it into economy.
I think I have some problem with the technique here, so I need to have another computer or telephone to see the questions. So I would just like to encourage you to send us the questions to Volkmar. Thank you very much. Your questions, and we will answer as many. I will ask Volkmar to answer as many of them as possible. And the questions that we don't have time for in the show, we will forward to the professors to be answered afterwards. So here we have a question to you. What do you think will be the next new staple food product based on yeast fermentation?
Oh, the next one. I mean, we have, of course, some staple foods, so some things, not talking about bread, so that is very traditional, but things like tempeh, for instance, there's usually a filamentous fungus, but we have also some yeasts around. But staple food. Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe for instance, that is possible, kind of vegetable cheese or yogurt, so where we also, we have to ferment it to get a certain consistency, also to certain aroma, to make it tasteful. I must say, I have tasted those vegetable cheeses not really my favorite, but also so having also some of this taste, so that could be a real staple food, since there is a huge demand and well.
Have you tried wood oil or straw oil in your cooking?
For the moment, I must say we don't have enough volume for producing that. That would be very interesting.
But you have tried it yourself?
I think it's not allowed to taste those stuff in the lab. So also I can only tell you it tastes a bit like carrot juice.
Like
carrot juice,
okay,
because
like carrot
of
juice.
the carotenoids.
Yeah.
So, but of course, officially I have not tasted it.
Officially, yeah.
But we keep it.
Yeah, we keep
yes.
it among us. Yeah, exactly. So, well, you talked about the fish industry, and I wonder, what does it take to introduce microbial oils in the fish industry to make it more sustainable? Is it back to the costs, or?
Yeah, it's back to the costs. That is right. So although there are efforts in getting it, we have at the moment also a big Nordforsk program. My colleague Johanna Blomqvist is leading this from our side. Where we're doing research, and I know in Norway one is doing several efforts here. There were actually even some efforts to replace some of the long chain unsaturated fatty acids by some filamentous fungi in that terms. There are also a big issue of using heterotrophic algae to make those long chain fatty acids. Also, I think there is something on, also let's say our technology as we use it is quite good. I must say, okay, we always convinced, since we used the whole yeast cell. So then we skipped extensive extraction, and added at the same time even some proteins from the yeast. So also, I mean, I think there are some technologies, I would say, with some will, and so maybe in that term, I mean, this terrible war at the moment, rapeseed oil, for instance, comes a big part from Ukraine, so we might really have some demand now, and then people might start thinking in this direction.
Is it more a question of market or than of knowledge, or?
Yeah, I would say market and price as at the end also. So we have these prices, and I think the real prices are too low, since they're not covering all environmental problems that we have in producing vegetable oils. So in that term, is it the price? Yeah.
Okay. What is the most positive and stimulating challenge you're meeting right now in your role as a researcher?
I don't know. This answer might be a bit disappointing for others. So saying, I mean, for me, the most challenging thing, or the most interesting challenge, is that one is in principle every day doing something that nobody else has done before. So one is going in principle on a new field, where we discovering things every day. So while looking on the genomes of this yeast, seeing that in principle one cell can consist the genome of 2 different species, I think this is amazingly exciting for me. I think, well, I'm a nerd, so and that might not be so exciting for others. So of course, I would like to say it would be great that we every day save the world, but this is not science.
No.
Science is step by step by step, and at the end we might save the world, but that is not what we have daily. So that's.
But it sounds very nice to have positive challenges every day and to do those
that we have
findings all the time. So thank you very much, Folkmar Passat, for.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you too.